All right, welcome everybody. I'll just have a look and see how many of us are online. And it's a huge 4 participants, so we're quite low today, which is probably predictable given that, in fact, it is assessment time. So I'll just take a quick audit and just welcome Samara, Alison, Noel, and David is here too, so welcome everyone. And what I'll do is I'll just quietly just null that so we don't all have our faces on the recording, which could be a nice thing to do. So this week, I think I've brought up the wrong PowerPoint slideshow here. Let's just see what happens when I click to second screen. No, it's the right one. I've just put the wrong title on it. Okay, so I may have to amend that. Let's just check that we're recording. And we are recording. Let's go. So this week in the forums, we've had quite a busy time. So when I go into the forum, I've probably spent as much time in the forum this week as I have at home. So I congratulate people and just thank you for getting involved in the forum and bringing up all those relevant questions. And there are a heap of them at this stage. And I'll just drag it across and show you that, in fact, there is the forum and some wonderful headshots of people who are getting busy in the forum. People are confused, people with referencing issue. There's PowerPoint help questions coming from the floor rapidly. Does it have to be PowerPoint? No, some people are actually using video forum. So I'll talk a little bit about these as we get going, but just to pull that away to let you know that these are real concerns that come from the forum in case you're not active. Paula was talking about an elastic 20 seconds. I mean, am I able to speak for 20 seconds and then, allow a few seconds for slide transition? Look, no one's going to beat you around the head with a stick for that. Obviously, the key here is, I said to Paula at the time, if you find you're talking for 20 or 21 seconds and then doing a 2-second transition, the key to watch out for is this notion of unfair advantage. When your markers mark your paper, the video runs a clock, as you can see on your audio attachment. So your audio is ticking by, people are aware of how long you're speaking, and if you're constantly going above the 20 seconds, they may query it. So do it at your own peril. But, if you do it to the degree where you're actually attracting an unfair advantage, then I'm sure your marker will let you know. But by and large, if you're speaking for 20 seconds and then allowing a 2 to 3 second transition, there's no real advantage in that. That's really just good pacing, and that constitutes good editorial decisions. Danielle's led a really rich discussion this week on referencing. Thank you, Danielle. Caitlin's popped into an earlier discussion on using video. We've actually had 3 or 4 people submit now using video. That's MP4 format, and the Paishakushes are great. They've got some of them have got background music. They're just using a rich dimension and rich media, which is really, really good. Samara's losing her voice, Maxine also, and by that I mean that their voice is not recording, not staying on the PowerPoint slideshow. I've actually been talking to people about going back to basics, about saving your file as a PPTX, and once you've saved it as the PPTX, about inserting audio, recording the audio, hitting the stop button, attaching it to the slide, putting it in the right-hand corner for the marker, and then moving on to the next slide and recommencing. It is a stepwise process, and if you're going to use this in your teaching, the best way is to try it yourself as a teacher first. That way, when you use it with your students, they'll be able to manage it and do it a lot better.
Colin, sorry, it's Maxine. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's actually working. I've done it this afternoon, and I am so happy that it's working.
Oh, Maxine, you killed it. Well done. Well done.
Thank
I'm so delighted for you. Well done. That's persistence. Maxine is just so resilient, and she's bounced back and just come up with new solutions and resolutions. Well done. I take my hat off to you. Caitlin, Jacqueline, Kellyanne and Megan are all looking for clarification, and hopefully they've got that. The forum has been quite busy, and I've probably taped the equivalent of War and Peace this week. So please have a look at those if you've got questions there, if you're wondering if you're on the right track. These are the names who are leading that discussion and coming up with some very good questions. And Casey was looking for confirmation. And as I said to Casey, we're all ex-babies, and we all wonder, at some stage whether we're on the right track. Confirmation. Casey, in this case, sounds like she's on the right track, but if you're looking for confirmation, please just shoot through discussions, get involved and see what's happening so that you can actually get some feedback on what you're doing. And more people are coming out of the woodwork, and I think anxiety and tension levels are dropping, which is really, really good. So we're all realised that we're imagining the worst when in fact we're all actually pretty much on track, which is really good. And again, Maxine's little confession there, which is brilliant. So this week, really, we're talking about working scientifically, and this is really code for how do we know it's bullshit. And this is what your kids are sitting there thinking, oh, well, you know, teaching's bullshit, school's bullshit. I mean, reality is science is dropping. Engagement with science is dropping. At the high school level and the senior levels, it's lower than it's ever been. At university, we do not have enough graduates to fill our employment vacancies in IT and science professions. So what we're looking at is a vacuum of knowledge. We're looking at a desert. And we're importing at the moment, we're even importing teachers from New Zealand at the moment because we have more and more people doing trades in Australia than we have doing higher degrees. So we've got a shortage of knowledge workers. And this extends to our science and our ICT fields. And what we've got to do as teachers, really, and the first point in the ebook this week was, how do we know it's bullshit? Actually engage kids. And here was a little experiment used by teachers throughout Sydney where they posted the effects of global warming. And the result among students was just profound. You know, so can you get out in your local community? Can you take some photographs? Can you superimpose a crocodile, as we've got here, down at the Parramatta Road train station? Bondi units and flats after a sandstorm. Here we've got sharks swimming around the bottom of the Manly ferry terminals. The dam of Sydney, the Sydney Opera House after a storm, the perfect storm, and of course surfers running the wave, cutting the face in front of the Opera House there. How do we know it's bullshit? I mean, these sorts of kids, you know, they get kids in. Kids love this sort of stuff. And this week we're going to go back and look at this whole notion of science as play. And let's face it, you know, when animals do this, you never see a maternal lion sitting there with her cub with a whiteboard, you know, running through PowerPoints on how to be a lion. You just don't see it. It's all done through play. If anyone's got a dog, you know exactly what I mean. You know, having a dog, having a hierarchy, you've really got to tune into the animal's conceptions of hierarchy and play. And if you can do that, then you're going to be an effective teacher. And that's what we're talking about here, you know, being an effective teacher. So where do we go? Why science investigations? And we know we've been banging on about the 5 E's, and hopefully it's not monotonous. Hopefully you can see why we're doing this, that the 5 E's essentially are the backbone of science curricula. And if you can master the 5 E's, then you can teach anything as science, basically. And we're going to look at that today, some of the obscure topics that we don't teach that we should teach. We really should teach things that are, you know, of minor interest to us. If you look in your refrigerator, believe it or not, you've got a whole term of science. If you go to your cosmetics cupboard, you've got a whole term of science. And this is really, really easy to implement once you understand the 5 E's. So why investigations? So scientific thinking and inquiry process, they're critical. And we're looking at the whole notion that the real world here in diagram 1 is really a feedback loop between the information our brains receive and the decision we make about that. We then form a mental model in this single loop learning. So what we learn about the world, you know, we learn when, you know, heat is dangerous to touch. Why? Because we have the mental model of a blister or a burn. If you, as a child, in my generation, there was no such thing as sun smart. We used to go out and get blisters on our shoulders, and the competition was to see who could have the biggest bubble. You know, it's quite absurd. But the mental model these days, of course, is that, you know, slip, slop, slap, the sun is bad. So our decision-making rules are geared around that. With science education, we try to extend that one level further. Now, Chris Argyris in 1971 came up with the whole notion of single loop learning. He extended that in the 90s to double loop learning, and in 1998 talked about triple loop learning, where we actually sit back and deal with the ethical and moral consequences of what we've done. So here we've got the mental model and the decision-making rules we apply. We make a decision, we apply it, but constantly we're testing that through. How does that work? How does that work? And here is what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development. So none of this is new. Argyris is not new. Vygotsky is not new. In fact, today we're going to go back to the 11th century to find out the origins of the scientific method. So none of this is new. What we are good at now is putting information together. What we are good at is brain-based teaching and brain-based learning. And that's what makes science so exciting, I think, as an area to teach. So when we go beyond engagement, the first couple of weeks have been talking about the importance of engagement and diagnostic assessment. And if we look at the centre of this journey, we've got the student's journey here. And we've got the engage, we've got the explain, explore, we've got the, you know, the double loop happening here. And over here we've got the elaborate and evaluate. But students come into the world with an old mental model. And a good teacher will, as our diagrams on each side here point out, a good teacher will engage that model. Because the worst thing you can do to a learner is tell them they're irrelevant, to tell them that their worldview is wrong. What you've got to do is you've got to, wow, well, why do you think that? Wow, what evidence do you have to support that? Okay, let's all write this down. And then once you've done that, you can then shift into this circular, this epilogue here of moving through what new knowledge is. You can explore and explain how new knowledge may actually challenge the old mental model. Of course, you're going to run into frustration. Of course, you're going to be the more competent other. And this is what Vygotsky says you should be. The teacher should engage in formative assessment to reconstruct, to deconstruct these old models and to reconstruct them into something new. Take students past the desire to bail. Here's where good teaching fits in. When a student desires to quit, that's when you've got to deal with disengagement. That's when you've got to come in and do some transformative learning, where you slip into the elaborate stage and the evaluate stage, where you start to say to students, you have a new understanding here, and I know that it clashes with your old understanding, but let's test it. Let's see where it takes us. And this is the model that we're exploring in the 5 E's. This is the basis of all of those science units we're doing. If you can understand, and this semester we talk a lot about existing science units. Next semester in chemical and physical sciences, we'll move beyond existing units and start to look at our own teaching, because there is chemicals and physical components to everything and in everything we do. So let's zoom out. Let's take a worldview. Let's time travel. We can do that because it's just pretend. But essentially we're going out to the year 2030, and we're not the first ones to do this. There was a conference in Ontario last year, and they took the world's leading educators and they said, let's take a helicopter view, let's go out to 2030. The world's population is now 8.5 billion. Well, they were wrong in that actually. It's now actually 9 billion, so it's going to surpass that. Global temperatures are higher. Okay, again, they've underestimated that. They're actually 2.6 degrees higher. Seas are now actually 70 centimetres higher than 2016. So we're starting to see all of the things they assumed then are dramatically underestimated now. The change, the quantum change, the discontinuous change that we imagined back in 2016 at the time of this conference has now changed dramatically. It's moving a lot faster than we first thought. We're facing freshwater shortages, glaciers are melting, salt water is contaminating fresh water, we're heading for a water crisis, many cities are being damaged by climatic events, 40 million environmental refugees are scattered from their homelands. We've got to look at the violent backlash. We've had some of that in Africa, we've had some of that in Myanmar, we've had some of it here in Australia. Flooding and disasters costing billions of dollars annually. And what this is doing, it's depleting national accounts. So look at Australia this year, introducing the National Disability Scheme. Now, it's actually had to impose a further tax, a Medicare tax, an additional extension to the Medicare tax, a levy to fund this scheme because it's running down its national accounts. What is the biggest single drain on national accounts at the moment? It is actually natural disaster. So our spending on critical social infrastructure and investment is being diverted to add for repair and for the repatriation of communities that get affected by climatic events. Now, because our school funding comes from that same body of money, it's also getting cut back because more money is being diverted to repairing the environment and repairing communities, and so it's got to be taken from somewhere. So funding is going to be cut down. We're already seeing a cut in state school teachers, a growth in the private sector, private schools. We're starting to see less instructional hours are being cut. Total years of schooling are being cut. Okay, in some regions, the conversion of economic, environmental, social crises have led to educational reform. So we're starting to new programs and priorities, new curricula, new types of schools, a new educational path better adapted to life on a changing planet. But unfortunately, here in Queensland, that's happening very, very slowly. Around the world, it's happening more quickly. If we look at the early childhood sector and the private school sector, it's happening quite dramatically in Queensland. There are a lot of environmental schools, there are a lot of bush kindergartens, there are a lot of things being set up. But by and large, schools are still in this lag crisis. okay, where they're trying to do the same with less money, and as a result, they're doing it less well. Ultimately, we're moving towards an environment of less will mean less. We're going to see a cutback in government schooling. So by 2030, there was this wonderful global forum, and they talked about what's, the Equinox Summit, what's the world going to look like in 2030? And so they said there's going to be 4 major changes to education. These changes are going to be the what? The stage-based, not age-based learning. Okay, we're going to have stage-based learning, qualitative portfolio assessment, and we're going to be including NGOs, private organisations, and the public in our schooling process. How's that going to happen? Well, we're going to get rid of our age-based learning. So we're going to get rid of grades 9 to 12, and we're going to replace them with a project-based system. Kids will come into grade 9. It will basically be senior high school. We will use our brain science, our knowledge of brain science, to work out an individual program for each kid. And that kid will go ahead then to demonstrate their performance in that program over a range of different subjects. The benefit, the time that students spend in school is not dependent on their age, but instead on their ability to perform. So if you come in as a year 9 student and you can complete your high schooling in 2 years, then technically at the end of year 11, you've got entry into university. You're no longer being held back by this age-based learning phenomena. Now here in Australia, it's very, very strong. So this is one of the big things we're predicting with education. Stage-based learning will give rise to project-based learning. And one of the biggest problems we deal with in science education is disengagement. Why is stage-based learning coming in? It's going to create project-based learning. And again, the aim is to deal with high and low performing students. So our high performing students, believe it or not, disengage just as much as our low performing students. Okay, they're doing things that don't challenge them. As a result, of course, we're getting underachievement at both levels. So we've got this little middle of students, the peak of the middle, and it's the one that we're predominantly pitching towards. It's the one that we're servicing. And that group of students are the ones who are failing to pick up and go on with science and technology as their courses. The third major change is a qualitative portfolio. We're moving away from standardised testing. Believe it or not, America's moving very quickly away from standardised testing. And it's moving it much more towards qualitative assessment. Now, most of us have worked in organisations. We know what a 360-degree assessment is, where you get feedback from your supervisors, you get some from your clients, you get some from your peers. The aim is to create a circle of feedback. And essentially, that's what we're moving towards in education, where you will have peer assessment, which will be just as relevant as teacher assessment. You'll have industry assessment based on your portfolio, just as relevant as your teachers and your peers. You'll have community assessment based on how effective you are as a member of the community practicing the skills that you're learning at school. So we're going to move away from examinations. Okay, we're going to move away from that conformity, that governance style of learning, into a much more democratic system. And of course, schools are going to look different. A teacher basically will be employed for half the time which they're paid for, okay, and the rest of the time they'll be working in an organisation within the community or within society or within business or within ICT or within one of the largest areas, of course, will be community health. And so we're all starting to see, teachers facing the reality of a world and students facing the reality of a world through more than just the eyes of one teacher. Let's face it, that's a pretty limiting discourse. So we can see that this, this whole philosophical agenda pushing us towards new teaching is taking us away from the origins of schooling. And let's face it, students are aware of this. They feel that there is a clear divide between schooling and learning. A lot of students feel disadvantaged by current assessment models. It constrains their ambition. They can't do what they really want to do. Instead, they have to do what the school offers. It offers them a limited understanding of the realities of the world. A school can only do what a school can do. It can't do what business can do. It can't do what industry can do. It can't do a project in robotics, for instance, because it's too resource intense. And let's face it, not many teachers have those skills. So in the past few decades, school has succeeded in only one aspect, and that is to decouple itself from the idea of learning. In other words, schools have become anti-learning. Now, I know that's a scary proposition, but this is what the research is presenting. And this explains why our students are disengaging with learning, and in this case, with science. Any comments from you guys? Any experience there to support that? That's okay. I like a healthy silence. Well, let's see who's online. We might ask a direct question. The video panel. Sarah, do you have any experience of kids disengaging with school? And any idea as to why, for instance, that school is not as the be all and end all that it used to be?
Am I the only Sarah?
You are, Sarah, yes, at this stage?
Well, I don't know, like, for example, my brother, in the early years, like, he was, like, a lot smarter than his grade in, like, his social skills were low, but he was intellectually above them. And like what you were talking about, he was kind of always misbehaving and everything, which was basically because he was bored.
Yeah.
They couldn't like hold him back because socially he wasn't, like, they couldn't put him forward a grade because socially he wasn't able to, like, he wasn't at the same level as the other kids in terms of interacting and things like that, like at grade 1, but he had the reading age of, 3 or 4 grades above him. So yeah, I think
that's a great example. Thank you. And look, this gives rise to a whole lot of look, my own daughter, she homeschooled in year 9. She was at a school where she was really not coping all that well, and having a terrible time, actually getting bullied. She was in a class of about 17 boys and 3 girls, and one of the girls in the class was quite a bully. She was having a hell of a time, so we put her through a year of homeschooling, and this is what a lot of students are doing. Homeschooling essentially is what we call these days, it's actually a movement called unschooling, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But this is parents, this is families trying to respond to the fact that they know that their child is actually decoupling from learning, that if I leave my child in this school, it's going to become anti-educational. And this project, the Imagine 2030 project, the one that's coming out of Canada, looks at new teaching and learning ecologies. Teaching experience, new discoveries in brain research, new cutting-edge technology. Kids are going to finish up with fine-tuned personal education plans for each student. Schools will be community hubs. There'll be seamless connections between in and out of cyberspace. Teachers, students, families, professionals, volunteers, businesses will all become part of the entire community. It will not be unusual to see a local community running, for instance, its own school, and this is already happening supposedly with Education Queensland with boards of management, but running its own school and also perhaps communicating with schools outside its own sphere. And teachers, of course, will be half-time. They'll be working, sharing their profession with teaching and with other jobs. So when we look at the ACS, the Australian curriculum, it's an opportunity for Dennis Goodrum perceived this as sort of saying, okay, this is how we actually tackle the dropout in science. So we're going to need to systematically rethink education and do it in line with what's going on the planet. So talking about coming up with tools and strategies, this is a great article if you ever get it. The Assadourian is written in 2017, brilliant article. I can't remember the name offhand, but I will publish it on the forum. We must provide people with tools, learners, and strategies to understand the current socio-cultural reality that become bold leaders to help us pull us back from the brink of ecocide and usher in a sustainable future. I mean, chances are that the data saying it's too late, but it's never too late to do something about it. And so this is the new educational priority. Eco-literacy, moral education, and some of these key words here, things that didn't exist a while ago. I'll just select the highlighter here. Moral education, systems thinking, and critical thinking. And some of these are the components of this new system. The aim, of course, to restore the Earth system's preserve our own humanity. In other words, what Aristotle called, 2,400 years ago, global citizenship. We're now finally getting back to an education system to try and address that. So when we look at this, we can see that $579 billion around the year. So how is science education failing? That's the question here. Well, look at what we're competing against. $579 billion a year promoting consumption of consumer goods. You got to have this. Here's your accessory. You got to do this. Anyone who follows the media, particularly the ABC, would note the war on waste and have a look at the fact that 60% of landfill is last year's Christmas presents. You know, we've just got to look at these sorts of models of consumption. And in here lies a whole lot of opportunities for us to actually educate our learners. And, you know, some really big figures here, $579 billion. Models project temperatures are going to increase 2 to 6 degrees. We know that. And some of the things, of course, we're looking at is land disappearing, acidification, climatic changes. We need to create an environment where we are going to actually have the resources and the intellect to, you know, to deal with these sort of limitations. And there's a whole lot of planetary boundaries we're crossing at this time too. We're disrupting phosphorus and nitrogen cycles, we're depleting diversity, spewing an enormous amount of chemicals in the air, soil and water. And of course, we've introduced a new age, what they call the Anthropocene age, and christened this in the year 2000, which essentially is the destruction of the earth. And of course, you know, science is mapping this and logging this as we go. Now, to teach that to kids is really quite depressing, but to teach citizenship and awareness is exciting. But the current thing with schooling, when we're going now to some arguments against schooling, why schooling is failing, and therefore everything connected to schooling and failing. It's a form of misopedy, and misopedy basically is child abuse. It's systemic child abuse, and it shouldn't be confused with education. Now, and a lot of literature out there points to the fact that school is all about control. It's not really about education and empowerment. And it's about conditioning societal acceptance. And Noam Chomsky, one of the world's great scholars, you know, talks and writes and records about this in so many great ways. It's a fundamental structure in conditioning societal acceptance of the domination of children in other registers. Think about it. You know, we have an international Declaration of the Rights of Children. Children are a subspecies. You know, they are to be controlled by adults. You know, there's legislation there to, you know, to try and determine the ways in which adults control children. It is misopedy, you know, whether we like it or not. It's become structured that way. And children are subordinated. They're incapable of autonomy. And hence, you know, we've got this rigid hegemonic dichotomy, adult, child, teacher, student. These are power relationships. And this is one thing that we always need to remember as a teacher. When kids start to disengage, they are disengaging. It's a sense of powerlessness. And if we can tap into that and we can rekindle and empower those kids, then we're heading on the right track. So in this way, when we look at schooling, at some of the things it's achieving, because let's face it, you know, some things that are learned are not taught, and some things that are taught are not learned. But in this case, kids are learning that schooling represents the interests of oppression. A lot of kids are going into school, and let's face it, they're coming out and they're not surviving. You know, they're not functioning, they're not thriving. It's a failure to thrive. Whereas education, if we look at what education is, it's a process of self-discovery. It's about potential, and it's about ability. And herein we've got to get back. We've got to get back to a science curriculum that achieves this. And so I can talk more about the subjugation of the child. I won't do that. I mean, it's there for you. I'll leave this here so you can actually have a look at it. But to ensure the absence of coercion, children need to become scientists in their own life. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that through this session. How their curiosities might be fulfilled. And let's face it, some of the world's best scientists are actually children. Einstein was a child. I mean, he was engaged in play. Yeah, even through all the desire of his big theories. Stephen Hawking, even though he couldn't move bodily, his mind was constantly at play. You know, scientists are really just children who've never grown up, and we'll look a little bit more about that at the end of this session. So we need to present a broad range of opportunities to our learners. The child should determine which path should be followed. And look at these. These are the principles of the 5 E's. This is the principle of inquiry learning. When bound to a classroom, we often mistake obedience for education. Okay, and again, that is the subjugation of the child. You know, is it really learning, or is it simply compliance? And we talked a little bit about that when we looked at Philip Lechke's work, when we talked about engagement. And we had a look at, you know, some of the compliance behaviours versus engagement behaviours. When children explore the world through unschooling, okay, that is when they're being educated, they live into their creative potential. They open an aperture on alternative ontologies, and that is journeys. And some of the, you know, existing systems that do that is the Reggio Emilia system, the baccalaureate system. We can look at some of these alternate schooling systems, you know, where children come in and the first thing they do on day one of a class is, you know, day 1 to day 5 is they build their own desk. And that desk is the desk they will occupy until they can no longer fit into it. And then they build a new one. So the child actually creates their space, they create their place, and everything about their schooling is related to their own choices. Think about what's happened to formal schooling and how far we've moved away from that model. And that may explain something to do with our disengagement levels. So we've got our desk up there on the left, and we've got the fact that most children still live their lives sitting behind a desk being told what to do and when to do it. Think about your own pracs. Think about what your supervising teacher expects you to do. Classroom behaviour, learning management, all these different cycles. Okay, it's about telling the learners what to do. The function of schooling is not to instill education, but it's a mechanism for which hierarchy and authority are imparted. Okay, and Springer, we talked about him earlier in the session and earlier in the course. Again, a lot of this material comes from Springer's perspective and people like him. They talk about the cruelty of schooling. We've all experienced it. My Year 8 report card for physical education said, and I've still got it, I kept it as a joke, but it says Colin needs to learn to do more push-ups. He needs to push himself up away from the table and eat less food. C. That was the comment. That was the feedback. That was my assessment. Push yourself up away from the table and eat less food. Grade C. Think about that. You know, that was pretty cruel for a Year 8 kid. Teaching and learning models are built on subordination of children. They're based on the misguided notion they're incapable of autonomy, reinforcing, again, the power of the teacher-student relationships. And there are two distinct words at play here, teach and learn. And they're two separate processes, and they're actually, as Bave points out, 2004, they're quite independent of each other. Okay, they're quite independent of each other. So we've got schooling, we've got education, and then we've got unschooling. And we've got this whole movement, and look, a little point here. Queensland's largest school is the Charters Tower Schools of Distance Education. Now, we would normally think that, you know, Charters Tower Schools of Distance Education is based, you know, delivering schooling to kids out in the remote areas. Wrong. It delivers to about 12.5% of its student population is in the remote areas. The rest of its student population is in urban and rural areas, and also in prisons, also in detention centres, also in hospitals. But it basically is an unschooling movement. You know, a huge population, Queensland's largest school, 88% of it, is made up of people who no longer feel that they've got a space in the traditional school system. You know, that's a really powerful statistic. So when we look at new schooling, and we're starting to move here towards the Australian curriculum and science, you know, and this week we're talking about investigations, about making kids scientists in their own worlds. This new schooling is starting to push back towards this. We've got this whole notion of earth education and earth in crisis up in the left-hand corner. We've got education for sustainability as a cross-curriculum priority. And in order to be sustainable, we've got to turn kids into resilient individuals. They've got to be able to make decisions. They've got to be able to plan. They've got to have inquiry skills to support everything else that's going on. It's one thing to identify that there's a problem, but you will become overwhelmed by that problem unless you have the skill set and the intellect and the emotional resilience to deal with that problem. And hence, this is what we call the new schooling. It goes back, it's not new. We call it new, but it's not. Freire talked about, in his Schooling of Liberation, talked about critical consciousness. Right back in, you know, and again, back further than him, Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, talked about, you know, citizenship, and it involves critical consciousness. A big push these days, CQU, one of our big badges, is social entrepreneurship, that we're innovators. We're solution-oriented, that, okay, the world is full of problems, but let's face it, learning will produce solutions. And of course, there are moral, ethical, social, and emotional dimensions to this. And this is something that science, you know, traditionally doesn't deal so well with. We have ethics. We have moral dilemmas. All of these things need to be brought into science. We need to reconnect with a sense of who we are and the fact that we actually depend on our planet. And so our core education principles, when we look at sustainability, are these 5 elements down on the right-hand side. Earth-centric leadership, deep learning, creativity, interdependence, and earth dependence. So how did they get manifest in the Australian curriculum? How did we finish up with what we've got? John Kabat-Zinn, for those of you anyone who does meditation will know John Kabat-Zinn. He's pretty much wrote the Bible on it and on mindfulness practice. And he had a little logo, that says, wherever you are, there you are. So, here we are in schooling. And we've got this huge agenda of unschooling, which basically recognises that what we're doing is where we need to be. So right now, we need to be dealing with the fact that, school has excesses and absurdities, and it reflects the common world. We've got over-standardisation, we've got over-monitoring, we've got a whole range of stuff. We've got governance, we're just trying to control and survey kids. We need to put down a new curriculum map and enjoy the scenery. And as Springer says, take a journey without a predetermined destination, inquiry-based. And again, this goes back to Piaget, 1962. The child as a scientist. This is the principle of Lego and the 4Cs model of play. Reggio Emilia, play-based learning. Okay, the baccalaureate, play-based learning. All of these different schooling systems where the learner is directing the learning. So the ACS is trying to do this as well. The Australian curriculum is trying to do this. It's trying to become learner-centred, inquiry-driven, open-ended and negotiated. But it's still limited. It's a middle path, but it's not an ideal one. There are other systems, and those of you who get privileged enough to get into those other systems, the baccalaureate, a whole range of private school systems, you'll see that that the ACS only goes part of the way, but it does promote an absence of coercion. It's all about inquiry and engagement. It's about children exploring for themselves and teachers driving through question-based education. And it's all about children making their own decisions about what their interests are and how those curiosities might be fulfilled. And that's really, it's a long road to our topic this week, but how those curiosities might be fulfilled. That is science investigations. So when you think about it, the dichotomy, at one end of the scale we've got educated and uneducated. Where would you put schooled and unschooled? Let's just throw that open to discussion here. Rosalind, if someone was educated, would you say they were schooled or unschooled? You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I'm unmuted myself. Sorry, I was just thinking about my answer.
Yeah. Want you all to think.
If they were skilled or schooled, did you say? Sorry.
Educated versus uneducated.
Yep.
And would you say someone who's educated is schooled or unschooled?
I guess my answer would be schooled.
Yep.
Without doing any further looking into it.
Yep, that's fair enough. Nicole, what about you?
Hi, sorry, I typed my answer into the chat box before. I said it would go uneducated, schooled, unschooled, then educated.
Right. It's an interesting assumption, isn't it, that we tend to equate schooling with education. And yet some of the brightest kids I've known have been, something on the spectrum.
Yeah.
On the autism, yeah.
On listening to this, I actually work in adult education for ECEC, so I kind of see the products of everything that you're talking about. So I see people that come through the schooling system kind of at the other end, and then when the answer's not given to them, or it's not in a book, and application of skills becomes an issue, and they go, oh, so I have to do something to achieve this? Yes. You have to actually apply the skills and kind of do that thinking for themselves. And when I do implement like a flipped classroom environment, they stumble at first, and then they succeed, and you see the confidence grow, and it becomes much more natural to them.
Brilliant. Great illustration. Thank you.
I guess, can I say something?
Yes, definitely.
I guess like with the word educated, I think like to me that has the connotations of like going to some sort of establishment, whereas like just because you haven't been to school, I wouldn't say that someone's not smart or do you know what I mean? Like not learned, but I wouldn't classify them educated unless they'd done like a lot of reading and things like that. If they were just like learning, like you know, like handymen that have learnt a lot, but like, and they're very smart and they do things you couldn't do, but I wouldn't like think in the term of educated, but doesn't mean I wouldn't think of them as being clever or smart. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. Thank you. Thank you. It's a really interesting dilemma, and we know from our historical analysis now, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but you know, homeschooling or unschooling always was the norm. Education was the norm. The elite classes, but back at the turn of the century and in settlement, they all had nannies and tutors, and that was the Protestant classes, and ultimately they did form independent schools, but they were always very loosely coupled. Education was a process, and it was often very cultural rather than academic. Children were largely homeschooled. It was only when we had the Industrial Revolution and we needed one and then two parents to work that the little Catholic kids running around Sydney created havoc, and so it became a huge social issue. And that's the origin of our politics and the origin of our education acts. So it was really about control. It was never about, you know, as Jeremy Bentham hoped it would be, about the ultimate education system. But it's how schooling was born. And, you know, let's not forget that. I mean, we now are in a position where we can go back and we can honour learning and actually say, well, actually, there's a lot of problems with schooling. There are better ways we can do this, and there are changes that we should be picking up and running with.
Colin, it's Jackie. I just wanted to say that my kids were homeschooled, and we live in Cowan, up in Cape York Peninsula. There is a school here, but I chose to homeschool them. When they went away to high school and they actually sat in a classroom for the first time, they actually took a while to adjust to that form of learning.
Yeah, I can imagine they did. Because let's face it, a lot of things wrong with our style of learning. When we look at the different personalities we have, you know, if we split them into the Myers-Briggs types, there's 16 different personalities. And only half of those are extroverts. And our system is actually geared entirely towards extroverts and the expression of learning through extroverted means. Participation, answering, conducting presentations, all the way we demonstrate our learning is really in the public domain. So it suits very much extroverts. And often when you get an introverted kid and they sort of sit there and they're all quiet, you know, they used to get criticised on their report card saying, oh, he doesn't say much, doesn't contribute much to class. But actually this person's a deep thinker and they need to go away and take this away. And schooling tends not to allow for that. And yet this is what industry and this is what the next generation of science is demanding we do. We think deeply, we think long. And in a way, the little Oscar Wilde quote we've got here, we have a map of the world that's got utopia in it, and that's the country in which we want humanity to land. And that involves a lot of people to think about it. You know, we need more than one size fits all with education. This is the reason why we're seeing the high levels of disengagement that we're getting. You know, that we...
Oh, sorry, Colin. I just quickly want to say something. I was actually homeschooled till when I was in high school, and I actually find it really hard going to university because I'm so used to learning the distance way that I find it quite challenging to do it on campuses. So it's because I'm so used to like going to lessons and having materials and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite easy for me to distance, and it is. I find it quite hard to switch over because I was home.
Yeah, that's really, it sounds like Maxine. Maxine, what are the most difficult things you have? What are the things you have most difficulty with? Sorry.
Sometimes it's about, like you say, I'm the person that I need to think about stuff. And then even if I don't say something, it doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention or that I'm not listening. It just means that I'm thinking. And like you were saying, I need to actually not walk away, but go and think about it a little bit more and then come back. And people just think because I don't say anything, I'm not actually thinking or paying attention where I am. I just need a little bit of time to, like you said, think about it a little bit deeper.
And that can be frustration, and frustration can be one of those factors that contributes to disengagement. And again, you know, we've come up with a schooling system which has been an answer to what we thought was a need, but now we understand that need a lot better than we used to as educators. And that's what's really exciting. When we talk about science, a couple of questions for you. These are the big ones the kids think about. And these are questions I've got from kids when I've been out on the boardwalk, just doing different tasks with Lego and robotics, and with ConocoPhillips, the science STEM fairs we do. Kids come up to me and say, why can't any of our global telcos get indemnity insurance? This is a Year 7 kid, get indemnity insurance from Lloyd's of London or Allianz, the world's 2 big insurers. And he's sort of sitting there saying to me, I know why, do you know why? And of course, it's because the telcos, we're sitting on the cusp of a huge health epidemic as a result from the use of mobile phones. And kids know this, tuned in kids know this, but are we looking at it in our science classes? No. On the right-hand side, since 1973, and again, this came from a kid whose father actually was having health problems. His father told him the average bloke's sperm count had dropped by 49%. And, the question was, so where do you keep your mobile phone? What pocket do you keep it in? Because, again we're looking at some of these serious health implications from unquestioned practices. In Cyprus, Wi-Fi has been withdrawn from school buildings. Interesting, we're still trying to install it. In Cyprus, it's been withdrawn for health reasons. How can wheat, soy and other cereal crops survive being sprayed with Roundup when 15 years ago it used to kill them? Okay, so genetic modification, all these things that the kids know about, that it's important to kids' life, that are not appearing in our curricula. These are the things that kids want to know about. Our challenge is to bring them in. And again, when we look at rats, the technology food regulator for Australia and New Zealand, the FSANZ, talk about the genetic GM organisations and organisms and food, and how they've been approved by the Office of Gene Technology, and they've all been rated as being safe. But when you look at the tests that were done on rats, the human safety dose is 437,500 times higher than it was for rats. So, okay, I know we're bigger than rats, but we're probably not that much bigger. So these are questions of science, things that kids really want to know. And it goes on beyond that. I put a little video here today. The sound may not come through, but it's a nice little video. Oops, sorry, gone one past it. Oops, sorry, I have to turn off my pointer here. And no, don't want a laser pointer either. Okay. And just see if I can get this little video to play here. And it doesn't seem to want to go. Pointer options. And go back to arrow. You getting any volume with that?
I'm not.
Okay, well, it's a nice little YouTube clip, and if you ever need anything to explain the scientific method to your kids, I've got the URL here, and it talks about Ibn al-Haytham, who's in the 11th century, actually is the founding father of optics, if you get into any studies on optics and vision. And he's also the founding father of what we call the scientific method. And this great little video talks about the fact that there are 6 stages in there, in that particular method. And the first stage, obviously, is observation. The second one is research. The third, as we can see down here on the left-hand side, is forming a hypothesis. Then over here, we've got testing the hypothesis. And then we've got the analysing. And I'll just go back there. It's gone on to an automatic play. Analysing and conclusions. And presenting conclusions, and then of course the final stage, of course, is sharing your results. So again, it's a nice little video, and I've put the URL up there because it's a really good little example of what happens in I guess in the science classroom. Another person I want to introduce you to with, and I've put the URL too and the direct link here in YouTube onto the PowerPoint slideshow, which I'll put on the website, is Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he's again, a great philosopher and science educator in the States. And he talks about the fact that children are born scientists. And the problem with us as educators and the problem with us as parents is that we just need to get out of the road. And it's a wonderful philosophy that if we can actually take schooling out of the road of kids, they are actually naturally inquisitive. And look, a test for any of those of you who are parents, put an egg in front of your child and see what your child does with it. Now, chances are, depending on your child's previous experience with that egg, some may pick it up and toss it, some may roll it, some may drop it. Okay, but as parents, we freak out. You know, instantly we reach for the cloth and clean it up. Instead, as a scientist, if we were, you know, put yourself back in your childhood mode. As a childhood scientist, you'd say to your kid, wow, what a mess. What happened? And it could become an experience and, you know, an experiment in material pressure and in material breakdown and gravity. It could then become a biological experiment when you look at the egg smashing and opening and the yolk running everywhere. Well, you know, that was going to become a chicken. And all of these different options that you have. And this is what kids do. You know, they get out there, and it's the great thing about Lego. I've often worked with Lego with kids right through from year 4 right through to adults, and believe it or not, with the Queensland government in Lego exercises. And you get to see what they do with Lego, and they get into that play mode. They become scientists again. They take out pots and pans, and instead of telling them, look, you're going to make them all dirty, you're going to mess up my cupboard, see what they do with them. Look at experiments in heat. Look at experiments in heat transfer. Look at all the different things that you can possibly explore with the kids. This is science. This is what's going to continue to engage them in their lives when they start to connect with their own lives, with their own bathrooms, with their own kitchens, with your cosmetic cupboard. When you start to see all the toxins in there. Those of you who do science, chemical and physical sciences, semester 2, there's a little app called Chemical Maze that we download at the start of the course, and we use that for a lot of the science throughout the course, where you actually go into your own home and do your own explorations. These are things you can do with kids, and you can do them in classrooms. They can take the app home. They can just go home and do an observation and chart their parents' cupboards, chart their pantries, bring the ingredients back, and do a toxic analysis of the food they're eating. All these different strategies that we can do with kids in the name of science. So have a look at Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's the shortest video of his I could find at 2 minutes 15. It's very entertaining. And his basic premise is that scientists really are just children who've never grown up. That put scientists and kids together, and you're just going to need a bigger room because it's a lot of fun. Some questions linking to assessment task 1. The whole purpose of questioning, now it's really good when you look at assessment task 1, it gave you a huge opportunity to look at questioning skills and formative assessment. Now, I'm just reminding you, hopefully for those of you, you know, we've got 30 odd submissions so far, so people are putting them in quite well. But hopefully you've spent some time looking at questioning. When we look at formative assessment, we've got, you know, knowledge comprehension, the very basic levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where kids, you know, are really trying, here the teacher's working at that engagement stage, really engagement and explore, where they're starting to look at key concepts. We look then again at the application stage, applying knowledge to actual stages, and the sorts of questions we would ask there. We introduce the notion here of science classification. Oh, is that alive or is it dead? What makes it dead? Okay, and again, a little example there is frogs, the one they use in science by doing. Analysis, breaking down objects or ideas into similar parts and seeing how the parts relate and are organised. So here we've got cause flow diagrams. We can analyse, appraise. If this, then that. Okay, we're starting to analyse, you know, we're starting to draw cause conclusions. The next phase we've got up on the model, of course, is synthesis. And here we've got the Vygotskian notions of reconstruction, where we're taking the original science understandings and we're starting to rearrange them now into a new understanding, into a supported understanding, where we're trying to synthesize each of the key points of explore and explain, bringing them together in a way that makes sense. So we're looking here at cohesion. We're looking at cognitive alignment, constructive alignment here. And the final stage, of course, is evaluation, where we get, you know, through questioning, the teacher is getting students to make judgments based on internal evidence or external criteria. And again, this could come at the end of a discussion session. Which of your classmates do you think has the best method to find out how many frogs live around a lake? Why do you think so? And the process is involved judgment, arguing, deciding, assessing, attaching, estimating, discriminating, defending, where someone may have to defend the strategies they've taken. So when we look at all of these different strategies, you know, hopefully you've looked at your primary connections unit and you've looked at formative assessment and you've looked at where the teacher is engaging in evaluation strategies, analysis strategies, getting the students to do their applications, and of course, at the initial stages and early stages, testing knowledge and comprehension. So just some of the things we were hoping would come through assessment task number 1. Oops, I'll just go back one phrase. And formative assessment 2 was another thing, again, looking at the science by doing materials. Hopefully you've been able in your units to point to certain key questions that teachers use. Because as you're going through your Paishakusha, it's really important to say, this unit was on living things. So, okay, here are some of the things the teacher did. They made observations. This was the key questions, identifying this at certain stages of the curriculum unit. Students were encouraged to learn from their mistakes. They're encouraged to explain their thinking at various stages. All of these are key parts of the formative assessment process. And hopefully you're able to highlight them and include them, or at least point to them in your lesson sequences. So assessment task is number 1 is due tomorrow night, 11:45. For our part, we're hoping to turn them around in about 10 working days. Staff are on board, and that's our goal, and hopefully that's our promise to you. If you do have an extension, I currently have about close to 20 extensions in the course. Please factor this into your reckoning, because people who submit later obviously will have to allow 10 working days to get their work back. We've now got over 30 submissions in today, so it's great. And next week, of course, this session falls on Anzac Day. And so the Anzac Day is a university holiday, and some of you have commitments on Anzac Day for a whole range of reasons. So what I will do is I'll put up a recorded lecture for next Wednesday, and it will be there for your access probably from Tuesday onwards. And the theme will be STEM. Even though I do a lot of research in the STEM field, I actually don't believe in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and mathematics. I don't believe it's anything more than a fad in education, and I believe, for various reasons I'll point out in the research next week, that it will pass and it will get back to, as one of the presenters in our course this week actually shows. He talks about the science method as crap. The scientific method now, just Tiemann, I'm just trying to think of his surname, Tiemann. Anyone come across that article yet? Anyone read that? Or it's a YouTube clip actually in week 6. In the, just trying to think what stage it is, stage 2, maybe the explore stage, I think, of the ebook. I'll just bring it up and just give you an indicator of Tiemann Cook, I think it is his surname. And we introduce you to a couple of key people there. Yes, Tiemann Cook, who does a TEDx session on the scientific method. And Tiemann does a really good, there he is there, and his video clip's there for you online. He talks about the scientific method being crap. And basically what he goes back is to a position of saying, what we really need is a really detailed inquiry method, not just the scientific method, okay? It's got to be more than that. Up here, we introduce you to Maddox. Maddox is a self-appointed internet guru, and he's a lot of hot air, but he's got some really good perspectives on science teaching. Okay, so I do encourage you to have a look at Maddox. He's quite good. And just for a bit of a laugh, if you haven't been onto the site already and had a look, I do encourage you to go back to the first session and have a look at this wonderful clip. It's an old Snickers advertisement, and if you haven't watched it already, do have a look at it. It's about a group of builders, and well, essentially the scientific question is, they're saying all the right things, but how do we know it's bullshit? So again, have a good look at this week's material. It's now starting to turn you towards assessment task number 2. In next week's session, I'll do a segment of that recording on assessment task number 2 and introduce the digital cards to you. And hopefully from there, we'll start opening the forums and creating lots of early questions, so that as we move towards the end of the course, and the course from this point, we do a couple of weeks on digital learning, and then we get very much into biological sciences for 2 weeks in depth, and 2 weeks in depth on earth and space sciences, where we look at some of the applications and investigations common to Queensland classrooms that you may be able to pick up and use. Are there any questions or comments that people have at this stage?
Can I ask a question just at the end of the lecture about the assignment?
Please do. It is the end of the lecture, so this is a good time.
All right. So, like, if I'm one of the extension assignment people. So I was looking at doing sustainability for mine, but because I'm doing like education in the early years, like foundation in grade 1, they don't have any of the, like for the cross-curricular priority of sustainability, they don't have any content there in the content descriptors. Do I just not choose those grades, or do I use like my own research and just make up what I can teach them?
Right. Noelle, I'm talking to, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, you are right. I mean, the curriculum is silent on a lot of areas. And I mean, as I just said to you, I'm not a big fan of STEM. Nowhere in the primary curriculum will you find engineering. And it's one of the key components of STEM. And, you know, let's face it, Queensland government's funded $141 million, plus another $120 million to schools in STEM funding. And yet no engineering's taught. So don't be frightened by the fact that there's a silence there in the early years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Just intuit as a teacher, and I mean, you know where the gap is, and essentially you know how to provide for that gap of sustainability and introduce that sustainability teaching model in. Now, the danger with sustainability, it's traditionally quite poorly done, even amongst practiced and experienced teachers. Only about 8% actually get it. So when you're looking at sustainability, strip it right down and do something quite simple, but definitely you won't find anything articulated in the primary and early years curricula about sustainability.
Because when I saw it, I didn't look at any other questions because I'm really like interested in that, like in my general life. But then when I looked at the curriculum, none of it aligned with sort of things that I think of when I think of sustainability. So then I was like, oh, am I able to use the things that I know, or do I have to follow what the curriculum talks about? Or
yeah. And the nice thing about this assignment is you get to do both. You get to point out what the unit suggests in terms of sustainability. And then you can pump up the sustainability for your learners by suggesting some activities and strategies.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
because that just demonstrates your understanding. It demonstrates you recognise a gap, and you recognise that there needs to be some scaffolded tasks here for early years learners, and you're actually looking at providing them. So don't go into a lot of detail about what they may be, but make suggestions about what they may be. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions before we hit the record button and or hit the stop record button and get this posted?
Colin, I just have a comment.
Yes.
I work in a kindergarten, and the kids were interested in popcorn, like corn, and then it becomes popcorn, and so I was like, oh, we'll make popcorn, but you can't do it because it involves heat. And then I come up with something else, and you can't do that, and you can't do that. Do you think that with all these rules and regulations that they're kicking themselves in their own bum, really? Because you can't do it.
That's a brilliant observation. That's one of the things we're talking about here today between schooling and unschooling. It really is. I mean, look, to be honest, I left James Cook Uni and went back to Kent High School to start the baccalaureate up there in 2011, I think, for 3 years. And while I was there, they introduced a new rule in the playground saying that no student was allowed to tackle another student in sport.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, well, you know, this school has a really rich tradition in sport. And, you know, it's got the Kent High Blues, you know, which have been the regional champions for years in rugby. And so now all of a sudden all these big, you know, muscular senior kids are running around and all they can do is tap each other on the shoulder.
Yeah, yeah.
And
then in a world where autism and Asperger's and sensory processing disorder is so common, that something as simple as tackling or touching or smelling or something like that would work so much better. Yeah. Now, to cover that component, I mean, that is going to happen, and it's going to vary from centre to centre, Samara. So, some centres will be happy for you to run and demonstrate a popcorn cooking session and talk about heat transfer and what happens to things and how energy transfers through heat processes. So you can do a really good science lesson there, but ultimately you'll be in the process of demonstrating. So you'll need to find some more, I guess, less offensive techniques to do that. So chocolate melting is often a good one. Yeah. And making chocolate fossils is a great thing because then you can look at cooling rather than heating. So there are safe ways of doing these experiments. But look, I do take your observation, and it is a valid one, and it does make teaching science harder. And therefore it just pushes the scientists within us to become more creative. Yeah. Thank you.
good point. Any other comments or questions before I hit the cease button?
Hi, Colin. It's Alison. I've just got a question regarding the assessment task 2. I've just had a look at it, and I've noticed on the task sheet, it says about creating a card for a prep to year 6 primary school student, and then dependent upon which course you're doing as to whether you do your second card for early childhood or high school. But on your marking criteria, it actually says the card is for prep to year 3. I just wanted to clarify which one it is.
It will be prep to year 3, so thanks for pointing that out.
Okay, no problem.
Because what we're doing there is sort of saying to people, 2 cards, same purpose. What we're looking at is your skill as a teacher to use digital media and to construct a learning artefact which is going to deliver results to students and to differentiate between learners at the upper and lower end of the curriculum.
Okay, so for that example, I could choose year 3, and then for the second card, I would have to choose, as I'm doing primary school teaching, from year 7 to 9.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, Alison. Good interpretation. And I will have a look at that and make sure that typos are condensed and made consistent. All right, if there are no more comments, I will cease recording at that stage. Thank you all for turning. I do appreciate your tiredness. I do appreciate your efforts. And I do understand that science teaching is about number 20 priority in your list. But I do also thank you for your commitment to it, because it's what makes this profession and this discipline in particular stronger, and what gives us a future. So thank you. And I look forward to turning your assessment round and giving you the feedback you need to improve and can do even better on assessment task 2. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.